What's happening, everyone? My partner's Ian's keeping it real. What's happening, everyone, and welcome to Al Chile Boxing Talk. We're glad that you're here. We got the homies, Sean Gringo Hicks from Long Live Boxing, George with Off the Ropes Boxing and MMA, and the homie, Nopal Boxianos. And this is our Muhammad Ali special. Today, we're going to be covering Muhammad Ali and doing a rescore of one of his controversial fights, Muhammad Ali versus Jimmy Young. And we're going to get to that here in a second, as well as talk about his status, the great Muhammad Ali status, and what it meant for him to be the face of boxing, and what it means to be the face of boxing in general. But before that, we're going to talk a little bit of shop because some stuff's been going on. I just want everybody's take on this kind of stuff. So, dude, check this out. Canelo Alvarez over the weekend, he showed up at one of the fights, and he said this. He said, "I'm busy this year. I know they want that payday, but I really don't understand why they don't fight each other. Fight each other, and then I'll fight the winner of all of them. I don't fucking care." And this is something that he's already said twice, and it's refreshing to hear him talk like this because it should be such like a simple thing that these guys should just go on fighting each other, and he will fight the winner. Sean, like, what did you think about him just kind of coming out and actually saying these things? And how do you feel about the reaction about it?
Well, I'm glad that he did come out and say it. It needed to be said. And I think that he does need to be more direct when this topic does come up, because it is one that's brought up quite a bit, as a positive and as a negative. The fact that, there's a double standard in regards of what expectations are for him compared to other fighters. And we say it jokingly, but to me, honestly, it does get old that we have to wait for his decisions for other decisions to be made. He is the cash cow, so to speak. He's the one that makes things move forward as far as, the big money fights and the fights people want to see. But at the same time, if these other fighters could raise their platform by fighting one another, it would make things a lot easier for him to decide, and a lot more enjoyable for us as from the fight fan perspective, because better fights were being made. And, those guys are out there, Boo Boo Andrade, Benavidez, Big Charlo. They all have the ability to fight one another. And I actually heard something pretty disappointing. Crazy Maul was saying, he's already at 160 and he doesn't have the greatest resume. I know people, don't want to fair to mention that, but he's fighting at 160, and he was saying that he could give Canelo a boxing lesson at 158, which to me is just like the ultimate Jamal comment to make, that, you want him to go even lower than the weight class you're in. So, it's disappointing for them for not to do it, but it's great for Canelo to call it out.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, Sean. I saw the interview yesterday with Crazy Mel. Was he drunk? I mean, I saw one of the shows. He was kind of going back and forth where he's like, "There's the red cup." He's talking about. I guess there was video a couple years ago where he said that he would fight at 160 if Canelo wanted it. That's where his division is at, and then he's calling for a catch weight at 158. So. But yeah, the boxing world is always at a standstill. Even looking back on it, even with Mayweather and Pacquiao, what are these guys going to do? You have the same thing here with Canelo. There's enough fights for these guys to stay busy, man. It's not like they could just sit around. Time is going by. Andrade is 34. I know the Charlos are, I think, maybe like early 30s. So they got to stay busy, man. And it's not like there isn't enough fights for them to stay busy with. Benavidez, I saw also a tweet maybe yesterday, or that was tweeted from him last year. He's the one that actually mentioned it as well, that they should be fighting each other, and then eventually the winner could get Canelo, in the sweepstakes is what we call it nowadays. But man, I mean, you just think about it, like and then the fight also that there's a fight that could be possibly made is Jamal versus Munguia. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I mean, look, there's those fights to stay busy with. Same with Andrade. I know he's going up to have a mandatory at 168 against Zach Parker, hoping to put himself in line with Canelo. But hey, man, we're all asking for it. We're just asking for these guys to stay busy. And if they were to stay busy, look at how much more great boxing would be if we had these fights, these guys, instead of waiting for Canelo's move and not fighting anybody and then fight each other, like there'd be a bigger buzz behind boxing, I think.
Yeah, this is what it's gotten to, that it's gotten to the point where it seems like the world relies on Canelo to give them the awesome revelation that bears do shit in the woods. You know what I mean? And this is what it's gotten to, which is weird. You know, it's weird to see that, promotional companies are actually, hiring media to try to shame Canelo into bending to their will. If you don't fight these two guys, then all of a sudden now, I've even seen some shots where one of the PBC guys was interviewing Klitschko, I believe, and he was, he specifically asked Klitschko, and we all know that given the, political climate, of course Klitschko is going to say no fighter from Russia should be sanctioned. And, I'm not going to say that he's not allowed to say that, but I'm looking more at the whole scenario of you going out of your way to ask Klitschko that. Of course, Klitschko's going to say that his country's at war with that, and of course he's going to say that Bivol shouldn't be allowed to take that fight. But what do you expect Klitschko to say? But like I said, I think that it's wrong that you would go out of your way to do a whole interview about that, and then come out with this type of question to Klitschko. Also, I mean, really, I mean, what Canelo said is just facts. These guys are going to have to sooner or later take a dip in that pool called a dangerous fight that doesn't have such a big payday, and you're going to have to prove yourself. I mean, things that Canelo's been doing since he was like, what, 22, 23? I even think that even that Mosley fight might have been kind of like a okay risk, I'm pretty sure. I think Mosley was, what, like 37? And Canelo was like 21. I mean, he was doing it back then. He's been fighting since he was 15. That's a big risk. Not your everyday guy does that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's not beyond Canelo to ask the other fighters who are already like 30 years old to, finally, earn their way to get the fight. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that. And I'm glad that he finally spoke up about it.
Me too. And, Canelo's not telling us anything we don't already know. Like, he's always faced that next heir apparent when somebody's kind of earned their way towards fighting him. And I think it's kind of funny how dismissive Canelo is. Like, I don't think he's trying to be like a jerk about it or think that he's too good, but you can tell he's just kind of like, I'm busy for the year. Like, yeah, do your thing. I'll fight the winner. Go ahead. I'm busy. So I kind of like his attitude towards it. Like, he should be dismissive. Like, these guys, man, they just been waiting around. And honestly, like, I'm starting to get a little tired talking about hoping that these other fighters get it on in the ring, So this might be one of the last times that we talk about it for a while because, we see that these guys just don't ever tend to get in the ring with each other, but there are some things that are going on. Now fights do need to get made because Canelo is busy for the rest of the year. And I want to give a shout out to Sonteo, JC, and Team Batman Boxing in the house. All right, man. So now that we're on the subject, dude, I wouldn't mind talking about the Charlos a little bit more because, dude, they've been talking a little bit. And here's one of the things that first came up, and I want to know your guys' take on this, is that Al Heyman's PBC has reportedly made an offer to Munguia to face Jamal for his WBC middleweight title in June or July. Sean, you're the resident Charlo expert. You know what I mean? So let me know what you think about this potential fight. What do you think, man?
All right. So I accept that acknowledgement in that title, and I wear it proudly. So, yeah, thank you very much. I was actually very happy to hear when that came out, and without impacting the potential of a future interview with them, I'm going to go ahead and say this, despite what No Paul said, don't do it. I'm going to say it anyway. I think that's a 50-50 fight, and I would fucking love it, man. I think that'd be great. I mean, I know maybe name-wise, and a lot of people in the boxing community, as far as hardcores, may not agree with that. In a lot of ways, Big Charlo too, holds a lot of weight as far as people just hold him in a regard that I don't quite see him at. But I think as far as talent for talent, I think they're pretty comparable. And I think matchup wise, I think it'd be a really entertaining fight. And I see it as a 50-50 fight that would be the kind of fight we're talking about with that initial segment. The guys need to they need to fight one another for us to see truly who's, the heir apparent or who's another talent. Or how about this? it doesn't mean that if you lose, you're out the sweepstakes, so to speak. You're in a fight against another, top competitor. That could be in its own right. Like, let's say, for example, that turned out to be a phenomenal fight, and it winds up to be a sequel, or maybe even a trilogy. Or just because you lose doesn't mean you're the loser. It could be a possibility like a Jacob Triple G. Where both of those guys got an opportunity to fight Canelo because that was a compelling fight. So I think that's another mindset that needs to be taken in consideration too. Losing doesn't mean you're out of it. Just raise your profile by being in a competitive fight. And that's why when, Canelo is saying, he's telling you what he's looking for, they're not offering me anything. So if your name isn't really on a level where, outside of a hardcore or casual wouldn't know you because you're not in a meaningful fight. You haven't fought anybody, you don't have any belts, you're not really taking any risk. There's no reason for him to make any accommodations to fight you. So for fights like this is what it's all about to me. So hopefully it does get made. Sometimes I do kind of feel like the PBC is putting stuff out there from the standpoint of they put an offer, but how good was the offer? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a very Al Heyman move to make, for him to come out and say that. Usually they're behind the scenes. When they're like, what I've noticed, when they make true offers, they usually just get made. But like when they put it out there, they never get made. To me, that means it's like a smoke and mirrors offer, like it's kind of a low ball offer. But I just noticed as far as like the trending, as far as like how Al Heyman operates. But irregardless, smoke and mirrors, I mean, sign me up. I'm all about that fight. And let's hope it gets made.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I thought it was on mute. Sorry. No, it is a 50-50 fight, and this fight has been talked about for like the last 2 years or maybe a little longer than that. Munguia is already on record saying he wants this fight in 2020. What's the holdup? They've been going back and forth. This is the chance now. Like you said, PBC. Anytime they make an offer, sometimes the fights don't get made. It's usually made already, and that is a good point. So, smoke and mirrors or not, I mean, shit, dude, like it's got to be made. It's a 50-50 fight. They accommodate each other's style. You have Charlo, that's a pretty good counter fighter. Munguia, regenerated, I guess you can say. He looks a lot different now from his previous fights, but again, it's the opponent you're in there with. But you can definitely see the improvements. You see more patience, a better jab. I think his body work would be great. And it's good for boxing, right? I mean, again, like you said, who knows? It comes down to a really good fight, a rematch, good fight. All of a sudden, you got guys splitting a 1-1 win, trying to get that trilogy, and it just opens up the doors for boxing again, man. It's again, right now, to a casual, they just see, okay, well, Canelo needs to fight this guy, he needs to fight that guy, but when you do that, like you kind of exclude all these other guys' names out of the equation that could actually give boxing a big name. So I'm with it, man. I think it should be made. I think they both should go for it. I mean, they're both asking for the fight.
I absolutely love this fight. I think that fight or the Genovic fight is good, but as far as I mean, you can't beat facing one of the Charlos. And what I do want to ask you guys is, because I've been talking about it too, but I didn't really see if the WBC is gonna say that. Did they call Munguia did they mandate this fight or something like that?
I don't think it's been officially mandated, but he's the number one mandatory, if I remember right.
Yeah, he's
Go ahead, Gringo.
Oh, I didn't mean. I was saying, yeah, he is the number one mandatory, but it hasn't been officially called. And then my quick Gringo 2 cents: this fight would be lucrative as fuck, man. Like,
yeah,
they were both. I mean, we could say what we want about both guys. They have big fan bases, and it would be a great selling fight. I mean, have that fight in Texas or Cali, killer.
Yeah, that is true. It's going to generate a lot of money, a lot of, this is going to make all three promoters super rich right here. This is a big money fight right here. And, what I do want to say off the bat is, I'm hoping that the WC mandates this fight. That way it's more realistic now. What's going to happen is if the WBC mandates it, then these guys got to start negotiating. Now, what's going to happen is I don't think that Al Heyman's gonna offer enough money off the bat, because he's got to come up with enough money to satisfy Sanford, Golden Boy, and enough money to get DAZN some money, because of course they're gonna want it on Showtime, right? And enough money to pay Jaime off. So that seems like that off the bat seems like, oh, like they're gonna make an offer, but it's not gonna be high enough. So these guys are gonna try to counter offer and say, hey, we want it on DAZN. This is what's gonna happen. And of course, Al Heyman's not gonna let Charlo go to DAZN. So I'm hoping that this actually reaches purse bid, and then may the best bidder, whoever bids the most, get this fight. And I think the mandatory split is probably going to be around 60-40 in Charlo's direction, since he is the champion. And whoever bids the most, man. I know if it's on Showtime, it's going to be pay-per-view for sure. If it's on DAZN, I hope they don't make this a pay-per-view. I hope they just give it to us for the monthly subscription. And you know what? I'm excited, man.
Dude, me too. And I'm with you, Gringo. Let's put that fight in Texas. And Team Batman Boxing says something that I want to touch on. He says they have two common opponents. Both went the distance with one guy, and the other guy stopped in Charlo, stopping Hogan, and Munguia stopping Montiel. I think it's a great fight. At the time, I thought the Charlo-Hogan fight was pretty good because, like I'd mentioned, a lot of people thought Hogan beat Munguia. So you could make the argument that was a good fight. But I do think that this version of Munguia is a better version of Munguia. He's better than he's ever looked. And on top of that, too, I think that if either one of them comes out with the win, it will be the best win on their resume. It would be a legacy win. It's a good stylistic matchup. They both need to take that fight now. And on top of that, if they're both interested in a Canelo fight, well, I think that this fight could potentially put them in the front of the line. They're both at 160, right? So, like, they could possibly move up to 168. And it's like Canelo said, hey, man, I'm busy for the year, fight each other. Like, whoever gets this done could be the front runner. And I think Jermall Charlo does need to get going. Now, he's only fought once. He fought once last year, once the year before that. And if he doesn't fight soon, he's on track to fight once this year. I think he needs to get a little bit more busy. And I think he needs to step up the caliber of opposition. I think Jaime Munguia might be perfect. He might be perfect. I think it'd be a 50-50 fight, man. So, that one excites me.
No, definitely. And I think even though that you don't want that to always be in the forefront of their mind or their goal for them to, land the Canelo opportunity, but it would be just that because, like I said, comparable as far as entertaining as the Triple G Jacobs fight, I think this would be even more exciting. And I think, honestly, from the fan perspective and just the casual fan, to get people to, the stylistically, I think it'd be even a bigger fight as far as, fan scope and interest. So from all the different intangibles, and yeah, I agree, definitely have it in Texas if possible. You look at a really big fight that's big on its own, and that's the whole thing. These guys, if they fought each other, these could be big fights on their own. As we get ready to talk about Muhammad Ali, during the era, the 60s and 70s and the 70s eras, as far as the heavyweights, they took losses all the time. But what made it so exciting because the engaging matchups, and the back and forth and the potential of the unknown, because you don't know who's going to come out on top. This has that potential of being that type of fight, and that's a really, to George's point, can really catapult not just them, but on a bigger scale, boxing in general, because this would be the kind of fight you call your friends over, you grill, you have some cold ones, and they'll sit down and they won't be disappointed, whoever they're going for. Like, I'm that confident.
Dude, I agree. This is one of those fights where I get excited when they even start facing each other, like when the first bell hits and you kind of see how they start sizing each other up. Like, even that would be exciting because you really don't know how it's going to play out. Like, they're both going to start dictating how they want to do things. So this would be like a fight where I would sit my ass down, like you said, after some good barbecuing, after a little bit of smoke, you know what I mean? And enjoy that shit.
And
You
they
know
both
what?
have, I'm sorry, go ahead,
ahead.
Nopal. No, go ahead, Nopal.
Real quick. Now that we're talking about it, even getting into it, man, I'd be more excited for this than either of those guys fighting Canelo, to be honest, man. This is just an exciting fight right here, man. Go ahead, George.
Okay. No, and they both have a fan base, right? Like the PBC guys, fans, they absolutely love Charlo. And then you got the Mexican fan base and people that follow the zone, they got Munguia. So you put that together, you got it's big. Exactly. It would, I'm now that you mentioned it, Opal, I would say yes, because let's be fair. Anybody pretty much lined up when these two guys lined up with Canelo, like we pretty much know the outcome already. We're just like we're gonna lean more in favor towards Canelo. But when you have these two guys, it's truly a 50-50 fight, man. It truly is a 50-50 fight. And I think the fan base speaks for itself. The PBC and then the Zone and Golden Boy, they both have good fan bases.
Oh yeah, man. So you know what? Let's talk about Lil Bro, Jermell Charlo, man. He was piping off on the internet. Dude, I love when Jermell Charlo gets all riled up, man. It's highly entertaining to me. You know, so I want to play this little clip here and then we can talk about it.
Crawford's, nigga Crawford. My dog live in Omaha. I know how Omaha roll. Y'all ain't never seen no real shit like this shit here. How about he do what's best and go fight Earl Spence then? Shut up, take a little bit less money, be quiet, humble yourself, and fight Earl Spence, he a stud. Do what he say, and then you might be the challenger sometimes. Bob Arum don't give a damn about him. Bob Arum told him to his face, he done got lawsuits with his own promoter. You ain't worth shit to me, for real. You got Ennis, you got Garcia, you got Thurman, you got people making a name for themselves in your own weight division. Sit your ass in your weight division and see if you can beat one of them. Cause fucking with me, you gonna get knocked the fuck out. I'm a knockout artist, baby.
Oh, so good. So good. There's a lot to unpack here. Gringo, what's your first take on hearing these words from Jermell Charlo?
Oh, it's music. I want to make that my new ringtone.
Me too, man.
I love it, dude.
I love it. And I really think that he's speaking facts too. Yeah, I don't want to get down on, Crawford, but Crawford did put it out there. Like he said, and I think it's been like, going on to a week where he said like, he kind of floats out a possible fight. Like he's going to bless us with, hey, I'll take on the winner and do the world a favor with my boxing ability. And don't get me wrong, Crawford's extremely talented, right? Generational talent. But, the reality is, let's just go from the standpoint of logistics. He's not going to get that fight. The PBC would not give him the winner of that fight. I mean, that's just logistics. And the other standpoint, people do respect him. The hardcores respect Crawford, but he doesn't sell. Just look at the numbers he had from the fight against Porter. He's historically never really been a big sell outside of Nebraska, and why he chooses to fight outside of Nebraska, that's his mistake. But as far as what, Jermell is saying, I love it. I think that is very true. And I don't think that's, I've seen people kind of turn it around. Maybe that's Jermell kind of just, making an excuse because he doesn't want to smoke. Clearly, people can say what they want about him. This guy wants to smoke. I mean, look at his resume. It speaks for itself. He takes rematches right away. He's very entertaining. Clearly, he says whatever is on his mind, but he backs it up. So I think that Jermell is right. Worry about your own division. Fight Boots. Fight somebody at 147. I mean, hell, they're talking about Josh Taylor moving up. That's a possible fight as well. So worry about your own situation. And there's still a possibility, even though I think maybe that ship has sailed. But I think once the Errol Spence Ugas fight, it does open up, because that fight, if Errol Spence does, you get that other belt, he does unify, then it opens up the possibility of undisputed. And I think that will give the leverage that he truly wants, him and Al Heyman and PBC, for EJ to go ahead and push forward on that fight, as far as if that's still a possibility. But as far as what Crawford wants is just that. He wants things that I don't really think are realistic, and they sound good. I know a lot of his fans clamor and they get excited and they question on who's ducking them now. But to me, PBC will never give him that fight. He's not a big draw. And then honestly, I think he's enabling the own narrative around him that he's just this feared guy that nobody wants to fight. But I think that he's actually enabling that by pricing himself out. I've heard several stories and people saying that a lot of the problems he has is himself. If you listen to what Jermell was saying when he's going off, which I love, be a challenger sometimes. So he knows the behind the scenes that this guy wants too much money. So it's not like people necessarily, because it is a business, that they don't want the smoke. but they want to make sure that they are compensated. So I love it.
Yeah, okay, what Charlo's saying, yeah, of course he's right. Like 147, there's so many fights there that could be made. There's Boots, and look at there was Ortiz, right? Ortiz is chasing his coattail just like a year or two ago, fighting Maurice Hooker. He fought the opponent they both had in common was Mean Machine Kavalauskas. He said, if you beat if you beat these named fighters, then we could possibly fight. So it's not like there is no talent at 147. The way I look at it, Earl Spence and Charlo both are PBC, correct? So people are like I guess their theory is there's not enough PBC guys, or there's no other PBC guys that Charlo could fight. So now he just throws to keep himself out there in the media. Now he throws out Charlo's name along with Earl Spence, and Earl Spence at 147, he gets past Ugas. Earl Spence, Crawford, that's a unification at 147. Say Charlo wins 154, he decides to move up the next fight, and then that in the bigger picture, it could be two unifications, one at 147, one at 54, depending if Charlo is the win or Spence is the win. But that's the way at least I look at it. So business wise, that could be pretty big for Crawford if he's trying to sell himself to PBC, because he obviously is a free agent. Top Rank doesn't want to deal with him no more. And yeah, he did pretty shitty on the pay-per-view buys for the Sean Porter. And reading into it, because I wanted to know why. From what I understand is that was the first ESPN Plus boxing pay-per-view. And for the ones that were not subscribed to ESPN Plus, you also had to get the Hulu and the Disney Plus along with ESPN Plus in order to order the pay-per-view fight through the ESPN Plus app. So if you're not new to that, and that might be a little bit of a turnoff. So then why am I going to do that? I don't need all these apps. I just want to order the pay-per-view fight, just like any other pay-per-view fight that I've done in the past. So that's the way I think. And it's not like he doesn't have a fan base. They've mentioned that he just on regular ESPN, he does have the crowds are pretty good. The streaming numbers are pretty good too. But I mean, it sucks for Crawford. It's not like Crawford isn't a name and these guys aren't lining up to fight him. I mean, he might be playing sometimes the victim a little bit, but I think for me, the overall big picture is I think he's trying to sell himself at least to PBC to say, there's Spence at 147, and then in the future there could be possibly a fight with Charlo at 154. So to me, that's the picture I see is maybe he's trying to sell himself a little bit more, maybe to co-promote with some of these promoters because he is a free agent. But I would love to see that overall. I would love to see the Crawford and Charlo if that was to get made.
And after speaking with you guys privately, specifically Gringo, he mentioned something very important, because they are twins, and I myself am guilty of this. I'm just starting to realize it, what Jamal does and says and how he contradicts himself in everything he says, I think that I've made the mistake of mixing them up, so whenever I hear Jamal thinking I'm picturing Jermel, vice versa. I mean, so when at first when I heard this audio, I was like, oh, okay, you're saying that because you don't want you're scared of Crawford, you know what I mean? But you know, like I said, it was because I was thinking of Jamal, and I know that they're not the same brother, obviously, but what I'm saying is his reputation, Jamal's reputation tends to carry over somehow, and I don't know why that happens, but it just happens. And to be honest, I do agree with you guys. Um, I think that Jermel was on the money. He's telling him that he has to be a little more humble, which is straight facts, and who better than Jermel to tell him that? He's already experienced the loss. He's over here, and then now, he's at the point where he's going to go undisputed versus Castaño. So, he's been through some things. The way he took that loss, he cried on camera, and it takes a big man to display your emotions like that. Not your everyday dude's going to be able to do that. So You know, I think that he was right on the money. Crawford needs to be a little more humble and do what he has to do to get these fights. You know, be the challenger, like I think my boy George said.
You know, I'll tell you, when I heard this clip, dude, like I agree with a lot of what Jermell said. Like I've said for a while that Crawford needs to humble himself. You know, he walks around like, you know, he's this bad dude who's avoided, but I don't know, man. I think there are some people that will face him. And when Jermell says, hey, man, you know, you don't want any of this, I will knock you out. I believe him. I believe Jermell is not scared of Crawford at all. I think that he thinks he can whoop on Crawford. I think it's a good fight. Like, to me, I feel like Crawford hasn't really solidified himself as the best at 147. He hasn't done it. He hasn't faced the very top competition. Is it his fault? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on your perspective, but he still hasn't done it. At 140, he did go undisputed, but 140 back then wasn't what 140 is now, right? So, I mean, if you're telling me like Crawford's going to go up to 154, like, I don't know, man. You know, I think I would actually have to break down film on that fight, and that's another fight that I would be very excited about. Jermell's not scared to fight anybody. He'll run it back. He's done it before, you know. So Crawford, like, you know, he's what, 5'8"? Like, he's not faced anybody who's like too much taller, too much naturally stronger with that type of power. It would be his biggest step up fight to date by far. We were all happy with the Sean Porter fight, but I mean, let's be honest, Sean Porter, like, you know, he's never really won any of the big ones, you know? So, I mean, like, there's really nothing that we can compare this potential fight to. Like, I think that this would be like a new beast for Terrence Crawford to tackle, you know? And so, like, I think Crawford needs to be careful about continuing this dialogue, because this could very well end up with these two actually saying, all right, well, let's talk about it and let's get this fight signed then.
No, definitely. I think there's definitely some potential there. And ironically, how crazy as it sounds, I actually could see if and I'm a big fan, but that Jermell can beat Castano, because that's not going to be easy. But if he does beat him in May on the 19th, then and then that comes to fruition, because let's take hold them accountable for what they said. And Terrence Crawford, who he said he wanted to fight, the 3 fights he wanted, Errol Spence, Ugas, they're fighting one another. They're busy. And the other fight he said, which no one really questioned, it just kind of gave him a pass because he's Crawford and he's so avoided. He wanted to fight Keith Thurman. Like, that was a very questionable move. Like, I mean, maybe some kind of, vendetta, or, something he has to take care of for himself. But to me, that kind of just more embeds the narrative. What I believed is that he doesn't necessarily want to smoke like people think he does, because that's not a challenging fight at all. I mean, and that was before we even saw him fight versus Mario Barrios. He was just saying that's what he wanted. And that was right after the Porter fight. So a lot of what we see from Crawford is what he's created for himself. And then just to ask everybody, whether you're a fan of him or not, whether you agree with what I'm saying or not, you got to ask yourself why people like The Zone, Eddie Hearn, why a lot of these promoters haven't reached out to sign him, right? There's a reason why, because they don't want the headache of a guy who's pricing himself out and thinks he's better than he is and won't take fights that are realistic fights for him to take. So, a lot of Crawford's problems are Crawford.
Absolutely. I agree, man. You pretty much hit it on the head for me, at least what I was going to say, but you said it for me. I think the big one is pricing himself out. And like Eddie Hearn even said it himself too. He wouldn't be able to offer him the money that he wants.
No, totally, man. And it's like, I do find myself wondering, although I do think Crawford is his own man and should be his own man. Like, I wonder who's advising him to take these steps, because like I mentioned, he's going to be 35 here in September. Like, he doesn't have that much time. So, I mean, maybe he should be looking to take a big fight or start calling out names or do anything to attract attention, but he's running out of time. All right, man. Well, hey, dude, we'll see how things develop there. But, dude, I want to start shifting this little subject. What we're going to do is start talking about the face of boxing. Now, we're going to get into the great Muhammad Ali and what he meant to boxing, especially in the 70s here in just a little bit. But before that, I just want to talk about what it means to be the face of boxing. Now, being the face of boxing, or the cash cow, or the torchbearer, however you want to call it, that person brings a lot of visibility and relevance to the sport, right? And so, like, I just want to acknowledge what it might look like to be a cash cow in boxing. And we all know that right now, Canelo is the cash cow of boxing. But I want to go over like the last perhaps 30 years and just take a look at some more recent cash cows and see if we can find some commonality. So I'm just going to breeze through them, and then we could talk about if we see any commonalities or anything that pops out to us. So Mike Tyson, man, that guy was dominating pay-per-view, was the face of boxing for a while. When he went to prison, Chavez was the guy, and he was still very relevant, in the lower weight classes. So there doesn't always have to be a single face of boxing, but these are just some that stuck out to me in particular. Oscar De La Hoya, the Golden Boy, he was part of some of the highest grossing pay-per-views, brought relevancy to 147 for sure. The great Manny Pacquiao, he was part of his, we're going to mention Floyd Mayweather here in a second, but, this guy was a big seller with Floyd Mayweather. He carried the sport for a little while too, when he got the torch passed to him from Oscar De La Hoya, and Mayweather's retired briefly. And then the great Floyd Mayweather, who was just making all kinds of money, right? In all kinds of high selling, high grossing mega events. So now that we've kind of gone through some of the more recent cash cows or faces of boxing, however you want to frame it, like, what do you guys think about this list? Like, what commonalities do you see? And how important is it for the sport of boxing to actually have somebody in that position? Gringo, what are your thoughts, man?
Well, excuse me. One thing that all these guys have, whether you're a fan of them or not, they know how to capture an audience. So, whether you want them to win or you want to see them maybe falter, they have, charisma in the ring, whether they're speaking outside the ring or not. Like, they're just stylistically extremely talented, and people respect talent. But at the same time, they may say something outside the ring that, surpasses their talent, good or bad, and you want to see them win or lose. So they're just charismatic. They know how to, capture an audience. And one thing that I know, people maybe not always the biggest fan of Manny Pacquiao, but one thing I always respected, win or lose, he'd always say, and I don't think it was just cliche, he really concerned about putting on a good show for the fans. Like, he kept saying, oh, I hope the fans, enjoyed the fight. I want to put on a good show for the fans. And I think a lot of times boxers forget that, it's not easy to win a fight, but also to make sure you're entertaining and you put on a show. That's a big part of it as well. I mean, you're a prize fighter. You're trying to, fight for money, but you're also trying to draw the audience in, and the bigger audience, the bigger purse. That's just kind of how the game goes. And these guys have the full package, so to speak, and obviously Oscar De La Hoya, Chavez was just, obviously a walking legend, and all the great things that he did. Canelo and the way he's carrying himself now, while basically, I think, really embracing the fact of being the man, good, bad, or indifferent. And that's another thing too, that, every time that I tune in for Mayweather, I didn't want him to win. I knew he would probably win. And he did. And there's a lot of that too, even who we're going to talk about later, the great Muhammad Ali. He even said, especially, during those, the tension they had during that time as far as race relations, a lot of people wanted him to lose, and lose badly in the ring, but they tuned in either way. So they just know how to capture an audience. They have unbelievable ability, and they just know how to seize the moment and step up when nobody thinks that they can, and do what most people can't, and that's just be great.
Yeah, you're right. And that's, I think, the funny thing is, so when you mentioned, the topics or the criteria of what we're going to talk about, those are pretty much the same guys we have. So that just shows you that a majority of the boxing world agrees that these guys were, at the time, the cash cows. So, like, those were the names you recognize the most. I think, unfortunately for Mike Tyson, he could have had a longer run, just that little, the trouble he got himself into. So that pushed Chavez, because Chavez used to fight on his undercards. So that pushed Chavez a little bit more to the forefront. And then next you have De La Hoya. De La Hoya, Mexican American. So he had both fan bases. But he was also American. So he kind of gravitated to the Americans, someone that they can actually pull towards them and be happy for him. And then Pacquiao and Mayweather. Pacquiao, he was humble, and like Sean said, like Gringo said, the thing that pulls everybody to them is of course the charisma in the ring. So when we look at them as a fighter, we're like, what is it that we love about these guys in the ring? And it was just that, like, it was, what we love to see, the skills, the boxing, them winning. There was always the factor of a majority of people didn't want Mayweather to win. And I'll admit too, I was one, I was never really like the bad guy or, right in his mouth. I always wanted someone, the bully thing. But anyways, that's just what it was. And then yeah, 70s, you had the big heavyweights, you had Muhammad Ali, Frazier, Foreman. Then I don't think there was really, you can say there was really a cash cow, but there was a big buzz to the heavyweight division, and a majority of people agreed that they really didn't like Muhammad Ali. They wanted to see him lose. Same thing, just his what he does outside the ring, but inside the ring, you got to respect it. And then you come to the '80s era, right? If you guys haven't watched the Four Kings, like I highly recommend it, the one on Showtime. Have you guys seen it? It's freaking amazing, man. The Hearns, Hagler, Leonard, and Duran, and I mean, there it is right there. You have the four guys in the '80s. Each one of them could have easily been the cash cow or the golden fighter, but I think what they learned from the '70s is to push a fighter to the fans, and that's exactly what they were doing with Leonard. He met the criteria of an American golden boy. Two-time, he won the Olympics in '76, the Pan American gold medal, and then you see him like on commercials. I think he was one of the first guys to actually be paid for advertisement or paid to be on commercials, and then just the career, the way they push his career through all the way to the very end. But right now we're looking at, of course, the present day golden cow Canelo, and I feel like he notices something about being the cash cow or the face of boxing, and I feel like he's kind of molded into himself, and he saw over the years of what we would say the golden guys were of boxing. He's kind of making it himself, and just he's learning English. I mean, a majority of his English is cuss words, and it's funny, but he's trying, man. So I feel like that's what he's doing. I think he understands the role of being the face of boxing, and I'm sure he tries to stay out of the negative stuff, but he's doing what he can do. He's only one person, and if he can fight all these guys at once, I'm sure he would fight them all at once. But I mean, that's my theory, like on the whole thing of with the golden boys or the cash cows or the face of boxing.
Yeah, this face of boxing thing doesn't happen overnight, and mostly from what I've seen is, it takes a special combination of a lot of things, talent, maybe even good looks, background story, something that has to do with something like Oscar De La Hoya, the way he dealt with his mother, and him winning the gold medal. That was an awesome story that would have put anybody over the top. And it nowadays, I mean, you can see they're trying to get Tank Davis to be the future face of boxing, and it doesn't happen overnight. He probably has to take a little bit less money up front, because a lot of the money that's being generated with him is putting back into making him more famous and stuff. And they're working hard, and eventually he's gonna have to take some tougher fights. But and the face of boxing thing, I don't know, man. But as the years pass by, it might just be less and less. It remains to be seen.
I mean, that's a good point, No Ball, because it's a responsibility, man. It's like, I think everybody wants to be the face of boxing, but with that, you kind of carry the sport on your shoulders. Like I said, you bring relevancy to the sport, and it's one of the commonalities that I saw amongst all these fighters, except for maybe with the exception of Tyson, is like a lot of them got the torch passed to them. Like, and maybe you guys would know a little bit more than me, but Tyson he had that aura. A lot of these guys had that aura, and Tyson was just knocking out dudes, right? So, on top of that too, boxing was in a better place in general. But like De La Hoya, he benefited from beating Chavez twice. Pacquiao and Floyd both benefited from beating Oscar De La Hoya. Oscar De La Hoya was the A-side for both those fights, right? A lot of the other considerations I would have is, a lot of these dudes did B-side. They got the torch passed to them after B-siding. They had great resumes. And like you said, No Paul, a lot of this stuff doesn't happen overnight. And, Canelo, he's almost starting to become like a throwback fighter now. Like, if you look at all those elements, Canelo embodies that currently. I just don't know if it's as necessary these days to be a face of boxing, or if it's that important. Like, I think that boxing is like in a very bad state currently, right? And it's like, I do think that Canelo does bring a lot of attention to boxing, but a lot of these people in the past were also the money makers, and Canelo's also obviously a cash cow. But with the type of money he's making, I just wonder like how much profit they're making sometimes. That's just my opinion. Like, on top of that too, like, I feel like the boxing starting to get consolidated a little bit. You have big entities like ESPN, like the investors into Zone. And I've been thinking a lot about how the top 1% owns a lot of the wealth in general. I mean, you see Saudis just throwing money at certain fights just because they want them over there, right? So this idea that, boxing, needs somebody to carry the sport, I don't know if it's as important these days so much. And I also want to know what you guys think about if anybody can carry the sport after Canelo. Do you see anybody on the radar right now? Like, say Canelo went down. I mean, I think it would be very painful for the sport, in my opinion. Casuals don't really come around for anybody else. Like, I think there would be a void. Or do you guys see somebody who could fill those shoes or possibly fill those shoes within a couple years?
That's a great question. It's something I think about all the time. Like, be careful what you ask for. A lot of people complain and not appreciate, Canelo. Hey, I used to be one of them, self-admitted. But he's on a great run. And what I most appreciate is that he's embracing and he understands his status, and he understands that he's in the zone right now, and he needs to make the most of not just being good fights, but to be active. That's a great combination for boxing. And to answer your question, I don't think that right now there's any one person, but I think that void could actually be filled by the vacuum. And I think it would basically, it would force everyone to actually be in good competitive fights. And I think it'd be similar to what George was talking about, maybe the Four King effect, where you have multiple people carrying the sport. Like, you could have a Virgil Ortiz and a Boots Ennis, and they could have an amazing trilogy, God please. And that could be drawing everyone in, because you have these young guys going at it, and, it's the fight that people have to see. And maybe initially that's all they want to see, but then they see fights on the undercard that draw them in, and it's a carryover. And also too, I know that I become more aware and has more breadth in awareness for me, but I think that's going to also, it may not also be a man, it could also be a woman boxer as well. As the sport, they've been dramatically improving as far as ratings, the quality of the sport, the matchups. So I think that that could be a different change as well. They're about to have their biggest fight in history, so it could be also a combination, not just multiple people, but it could be a male and a female boxer that could help continue the sport and help it grow. I know that being a father, my daughters are into boxing. They like to beat up on their brothers, and they love Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor. They get in the Bumgarner and all those guys, Mayer. So the fact that they're young and that they know who that is, that tells me that actually the dynamic of what the face of boxing is actually changing right before our eyes. We may not even realize it. So the true definition of what we've seen the cash cow be traditionally, I think, is encompassed and represented by Canelo. But I think it's going to eventually be forced to evolve, because there's only one Canelo. But I think there could be multiple people that carry the torch and put boxing in a really great place. So I do have hope from that standpoint.
So, Sean, I don't mean to go to you right back, but I just wanted to elaborate on what you said. So to me, it sounds kind of like you're describing maybe the UFC model a little bit. Is that right? As far as everybody carrying the sport and kind of going through tourneys, and then also featuring women and just kind of stacking them and throwing them against each other?
Yeah, exactly. Like, the sport will carry itself from the standpoint of better quality, and the marketability would come from the competitive bouts, and not necessarily just a person that people want to see maybe initially, but the competitive bouts that they'll create will make the overall brand of boxing in the sport itself will be brought to a higher level, because they'll be just more consistent. That's another key too, consistent competitive bouts, which will make things exciting for everybody. Me as a fight fan, when I always say, what's the difference between a casual and a hardcore, to me, when I talk to a hardcore, they're more excited about the undercard. That's usually like a draw, because they're like, man, this person on undercard, and it might be like the fourth fight on the card, or be some kind of random fight to somebody else, but it's something that they're really excited about, because they're just so excited about the sport. And so to me, if we can get everybody that same level of excitement about just the sport in general, because there's more competitive matchups, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. Like, once I think boxing realizes that maybe just putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak, and just kind of waiting on one person. Not saying I don't want there to be a Canelo or one specific entity, but I think having multiple people could actually uplift the sport because it would force the sport to be better.
Man, that was well put. I mean, you're right. It's if Canelo was to fall off the face of the earth, right? If he was to quit boxing, I mean, there's obviously potential guys there, but I mean, would boxing stop? No, of course not. But I think the rush to try to find the next face of boxing, I think, would definitely force itself. So we would see the big fights that everybody's asking for. And I think, honestly, I feel like maybe these guys already feel that kind of pressure right now. Because I might, right? You look back to the '90s, Chavez was the face. De La Hoya comes in. De La Hoya beats Chavez twice. All of a sudden, he's even shots to start him even more. De La Hoya has his run. He beats who he beats. Here comes Mayweather. You know, people thought, of course, De La Hoya won, but Mayweather won. And what happens? That actually shot his star up a little bit more, and he became the face of boxing. He turned from Pretty Boy to Money May, and of course, you throw Pacquiao in there. So now you have these two guys chasing each other. Everybody wanting to see those fights. And then, so I feel like in that era of Mayweather and Pacquiao, I feel like maybe there was two faces of boxing, and when they fought, it was kind of like, well, it happened a little too late. So then you throw Canelo in there, and yes, Canelo loses to Mayweather, but there was already a buzz for Canelo, coming into the pros or coming into mainstream because you heard of him being, I think, was it 14 years old as a professional fighter. Everybody wants to know who this guy was, and he has the name, like it was the name Canelo. Like, okay, who is this Canelo guy? You see him, redheaded Mexican, doesn't speak a lick of English. He's fighting grown ass men, a 15, 16-year-old beating them. He has some good fights before he eventually fights Mayweather. He loses to Mayweather. It's kind of what everybody expected, and then from there he improves, and you see what he's supposed to do is improve as a better fighter. And that's a great point. Like for the women's, I mean, this right now is like a really good era for women's boxing. Like Ring IQ does an excellent job of like putting these women out there. We've interviewed a few women, but nothing like Ring IQ, and I think that's great, especially for like the younger viewers, like your daughter Sean, where they watch boxing with you and they see these women doing what they're doing. They're winning. They're getting this buzz. There's a potential, just like the cliche thing is, oh yeah, hey, mom and dad, I want to be a president one day, because you've seen, someone that looks like you or the color of your skin. There's a chance to become like a face of something. And just like with the women's, like, you see a woman successfully doing these things to become a face of boxing, not just for women, but just the sport in general. But I feel like Canelo has embraced it as the cash cow runner. Like I said, I think he's seen over the past of what these guys have done. I think Mayweather, of course, embraced the bad guy role. It didn't really turn a lot of people on, but of course you have fans of it, and then you have the fans that want to see the people to stop him. But it's a really good topic, man. Like I just mentioned, there's so many ways it could go from here. Like all it takes is just for one guy to get the win. Maybe this is why these guys are calling out Canelo, because they understand like he is the face of boxing. They get that chance to beat him. That's your name up there in the stars now, that you beat the guy. So maybe these guys are thinking it's a passing of the torch if they were to get that chance like Canelo, other than just a payday as well. But it's a good topic, man. And I'm glad to and I'm excited to see what happens in the next few years, especially with the younger guys at 147.
Yeah, and we have a list of guys out there. We got young Tank, we got young Haney. You know, we never know what's going to happen there. We also have Boots Ennis. He could, if he gets a little more media support, maybe he becomes more famous and could be face of boxing. We also have Virgil Ortiz. Maybe he goes through a kind of like an altered ego like Floyd and becomes the face of boxing. You never know. And like I said, I mean, you also got Xander Zayas and you got Richard Torres. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen with Richard Torres. I mean, he just had his first fight the other day. A lot of people weren't impressed with his skills, but I mean, he still got time to do whatever. So, we'll be okay.
Well, I'm glad that you guys are hopeful, man, and we'll see. We'll see. If it's a collective thing, I'll be happy. But I want to salute everybody that I featured, dude, because you know what? It is a responsibility, and they gave us a lot of memorable fights, and I could go back and just name off the top of my head, and it was my era, right? There's a lot more people before that who precede Mike Tyson, who were obviously like the face of boxing, but I want to tip my hat to them. But right now, we're going to feature a person who's still the face of boxing, who's considered all the GOAT, right? The greatest of all time. We're going to talk about Muhammad Ali, and we're going to feature his fight against Jimmy Young, the rescore, right, against Jimmy Young in 1976. All right. It's on. Let's talk about it. And just to give you guys some reference, Ali was super busy at this time. He's 34 years old, okay? And this is just coming off his third Joe Frazier fight, right? So he fights Joe Frazier at the end of 75, and he's going to fight 5 times in 76, okay? And in April, he fought Jimmy Young, and then after that, he fights Richard Dunn, and then he goes to, I think it's Japan, and he fights Antonio Inoki in a boxer wrestling exhibition. Now, I don't know what the terms were for this exhibition ahead of time, but Ali got his legs kicked like crazy, and he was hospitalized for 2 weeks, and then he went and fought Ken Norton in September, which was another suspect decision, which we're going to get into down the line, but very busy. Also, there was an Ali gravy train going on, and I want to thank Lee Groves, who gave me permission to kind of use some of his excerpts. He said here that Ali's potential reward for successfully navigating this ambitious schedule was massive, a gross take that would exceed $10 million, of which $6 million would come from the Inoki match, though he only ended up getting paid 2.2. Business was booming, and the business of being a Muhammad Ali, at least on the surface, was even better. And just so you all know, 10 million in today's money is 50 million. So I did a little calculation on that. And back in the day, you had to be the man, you had to beat the man. You have to take it from the champ. Up until the late 1980s, the conventional wisdom in boxing was that a challenger had to almost annihilate the defending champion in order to win the title by decision. Entering 1976, only 4 times in heavyweight champion history had a challenger won the title on points from a defending champion. And we're going to the early 1900s. 1906, Tommy Burns over Marvin Hart for 20 rounds. 1926, Gene Tunney over Jack Dempsey. 1932, Jack Sharkey over Max Schmeling. And then in 1935, James Braddock against Max Baer, right? And so just as a reference, like we go from 1935 all the way to 1976. I mean, this is just a huge jump, all right? And Muhammad Ali was certainly the face of boxing. He generated the most revenue, and wherever he went, he would attract media coverage before and after every fight. He generated an enormous amount of ancillary income for the cities that hosted his matches and produced high ratings, which in turn led to the networks getting paid. On top of that, too, when we watch this fight, they're referencing Muhammad Ali as the greatest heavyweight of all time in real time. And keep in mind, we're taking a look at Ali later on in his career, right? But he'd already been through everybody. Very impressive. His run, I mean, it's stellar. And, we could talk about that at another time. Like there's an opportunity for us to talk about Muhammad Ali again, which we will do. And then all these fights kept boxing at the top of the pecking order in terms of visibility and relevance. And on top of that, the depth and breadth of his celebrity extended into books and movies, as well as other avenues inaccessible to other fighters at the time, such as food chains and comic books, commercials for Saturday morning cartoons. For all these reasons, the conventional wisdom stated that once Ali's championship reign died, so would boxing. So check this out, dude. Ali was 34 at the time, and he was coming in at his heaviest. So, and you can even see during the telecast, he's talking about, hey, man, I didn't have much time to train. He came in at 230 pounds. Ali was 52-0. He lost to Frazier, and then he lost to Ken Norton, which he avenged before they had their trilogy later on in this year. Jimmy Young was 17-4-2. Not the best record in the world, but he was on a nice little string of wins. And so this is a picture of how Ali looked at the time. A lot of people thought he looked soft. A lot of people were very critical of how Ali looked at the time. So let's get into it, man. I hope this gave you guys some context about what the defending champion Muhammad Ali was going through at the time, leading into this fight against Jimmy Young. George, I know you got to pick up your kid here, man. So let's start off with you, brother, man. Please tell us, like, what'd you think about this fight and how'd you have it?
Yeah. Sorry. Hello. Okay. I'm here. All right. Sorry about that. I thought I pushed the wrong button, but This was I mean, the facts you just put about Muhammad Ali, I was reading also that in the 60s they stopped airing fights because there was a death in the ring. And Muhammad Ali, the buzz that he got in the 70s actually pushed start um, televising boxing again, Kenny. So that was cool to see, man. And of course through the whole telecast of the fight, um, they kept mentioning, 34 years old, the good word, the greatest, and it's in his name too. If you find it in the boxing record, his alias is the greatest. Um, but it was a cool fight to see. I actually wrote down a couple notes about it. So in '76, he actually fought 4 times. So after he fought young, he fought a month later. Um, he fought, who did he fight? I wrote it down here. I'm sorry, but he fought a month later, and then a couple months later, he ended up fighting Ken Norton for the trilogy. So it was, in that era, they fought so many times a year. And for Muhammad Ali, already people talking that he should have retired at the age of 34. He's a little overweight. There's really nothing more for him to prove. And I think a lot of people agree that, what else could you do? He fought everybody. He fought Foreman. He fought Frazier. So as far as like scoring to this fight, man, it was pretty tough. Like I would say, like the first 2 rounds, you saw Muhammad Ali shuffling, doing using the ring defense. I gave Young the first 2 rounds. I had, as far as swing rounds, I had 1, 2, 3, and 4 swing rounds. So it was a little tough to pick on those. I think round 10, I actually rewatched it like 2 or 3 times because there was a couple things I missed in each fight. But overall, man, I think in the future, like for us to cover like a whole segment of Muhammad Ali would be absolutely awesome, man, because we know and you hear from people like Muhammad Ali is the greatest fighter. Muhammad Ali. He truly was one of the greatest fighters, man. He fought everybody and anybody, no matter how many wins or losses. He did what he was supposed to in that, when he fought in that ring. So I would love to, maybe in the future, we do a whole segment on Muhammad Ali. But after scoring 15 rounds, I had Muhammad Ali winning by 1 round, and in that 12th round, yes, there was a 10 count or 8 count, but the rule was if the bell rings in the middle of the knockdown, like you're safe. So that, obviously that gave Muhammad Ali the round, but I really didn't have to score the points because 8 rounds to 7 for me, I had Muhammad Ali winning. It could have been a draw, but I feel like in the swing round, watching the swing rounds again, I felt that Muhammad Ali won most of the swing rounds for me. So I have Muhammad Ali winning. An 8-7 scorecard for me is not a robbery.
All right. Thank you very much, George. I know you'll be back in here in just a second. So George has it. Muhammad Ali, the great Muhammad Ali, beating Jimmy Young. Sean, what'd you think about this fight, man? And who'd you have winning?
Wow. Muhammad Ali, just such an icon, so amazing, did so much for the sport and just mankind in general. Before I give to my score, something I wanted to share that I thought was pretty phenomenal. Since we're talking about during that time, that fight that he actually had with Antonio Inoki, that wrestler, the audience watching that fight was 1.4 billion people watched that fight.
Damn.
Yeah, so just imagine, we talk about making some bread, some cheddar from the networks. Absolutely. People were eating off of the name of Muhammad Ali. And it's kind of interesting that later in his career, he continued to get more popular. I mean, obviously, a lot of fighters had huge, amazing broadcasts. I mean, we were all excited that, Canelo Plant had 800,000 K, right? But just imagine over a billion. So within his career, the great Muhammad Ali had 7. One, unfortunately, was the memorial service back in 2016 in June. But he had, obviously, the Thriller Manila had 1 billion people watching it. Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, the Rumble in the Jungle, 1 billion people watched it. The Inoki fight we just talked about in 76. So the Rumble in the Jungle was 75. George Foreman, Rumble in the Jungle was 74. Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, which kind of surprised me. It was called the Last Hurrah, but he actually had another fight which he lost in the Bahamas. But the people that watched Muhammad Ali, which he took a badass whooping against Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes actually asked the referee to stop the fight. Over 2 billion people watched that fight. And then Muhammad Ali in his rematch with Leon Spinks was the biggest fight ever, with 2.3 billion people watched that fight, and that was at the Superdome. So I had no idea that fight was that big, and that's actually one of the fights he had that is not as talked about as much, obviously, as the Rumble in the Jungle and the Thrill in the Miller. So again, not trying to take away from but I just thought just to let that sink in and to let you know the only things that have done that as far as views have been Olympics. Olympics have had more views than Muhammad Ali fights. But keep in mind, they give credit to the Olympics, like the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup in 2019. It had more views. The Atlanta in 1996 had more views, but they give them like the credit for the entire 2 weeks. So I mean, not the same thing. All right, so get into my Muhammad Ali, Jimmy Young. First round, I was like, what are we getting into? Now, I will say this, like Muhammad Ali, he did come out and say, like, I'm going to do the rope-a-dope. He wasn't lying. He was really trying to do the rope-a-dope and draw Jimmy Young in. Jimmy Young wasn't trying to do that. But, I don't even remember Muhammad Ali really kind of throwing a punch, maybe kind of stuck a jab out there, but he just had the high guard up the whole time, just kind of followed Jimmy Young around. Jimmy Young didn't do too much more, but he did enough to win the round. So I gave Jimmy Young rounds 1, 2, 3 was kind of close. I had that kind of as a swing round. And I gave him 10, 11, 14, and 15. And then it had the knockdown in 12. So I gave Muhammad Ali 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, and 13. So I had Muhammad Ali winning is 43-41 in a real close matchup. I didn't see it as a robbery. And actually, when you go and look online and do some research, they have where you can look on Reddit, and most people view about 63% feel they disagree with the score, that they feel it's like either a draw, it was closer. But I had Muhammad Ali winning by 2 rounds, and the big takeaway for me is one, Howard Cosell is a hater. Man, he's low key just talking about how much Muhammad Ali is not doing it for the right reasons. He's doing it for the money. And it's kind of funny. Even Ken Norton had to speak up, who was actually on the card in there, and he showed up for the 12th round during the knockdown. And that was a real strange thing. And that was another reason why I couldn't give Jimmy Young any love, because when he went outside the ring, one, when it counted the knockdown by the referee Tom Kelly, which I think that was pretty interesting. Like, he was actually, and he had the widest score with 72-65. He's right there during the action. But I was kind of surprised Tom Kelly only counted it that one time, because I thought the more egregious time when Jimmy Young was literally just like sideways, like he was literally about to fall out the ring, and he didn't call that a knockdown. And he did it like 4 times in total. So it just totally turned me off of giving any kind of credit to Jimmy Young. He had some decent footwork. Obviously, he had a solid chin. He had a real good combination game, but he was like Howard Cosell kept saying, he's kind of pity pat. He really wasn't sitting down on his punches. He did, I think, in the 6th round, land a pretty good, solid overhand right. But overall, I gave it to Muhammad Ali. And another takeaway that I was kind of surprised too is highly revered and highly thought of as obviously Muhammad Ali was during that time and still is. I was surprised how many people were actually booing at the results of the fight. Like, that kind of surprised me. But it is what it is, and during that time. But for me, that's how I saw it, man. Muhammad Ali came out with the victory. Jimmy Young, close but no cigar.
All right. Well, Muhammad Ali wins on Gringo's scorecard. Thank you so much, Gringo. No, Paul, how'd you see this fight, man?
So I gave Young the first round, and then I also gave him the 7th round, and then I gave him the 14th round. I'll just be honest. I mean, Muhammad Ali's a cultural icon, so I don't think Young came in to win, and he was just trying to take little cheap shots. I did not appreciate the antics he was trying to push when he was against the ropes. I think it was he tried to do that in like round 11, and then did it again in round 13, and I did not appreciate that. He was just trying to survive, so he does that, and so I gave the other rounds mostly. I gave rounds 2, 3, 8, and 10, and 13. Those were swing rounds for me, and I scored them 10-10. Which I'm not sure if it's totally accurate for the time, the way they were scoring fights. So I scored this fight 147-143 for Muhammad Ali.
All right, man. So Muhammad Ali's up 3-0, dude. Thank you so much, No Paul. Hey, man, these are some great considerations, and I co-sign a lot of what you guys are saying. Sean, and we talked about this before, I think one of the reasons that perhaps like maybe the crowd wasn't so happy, or maybe that Jimmy Young did get so much credit, is because Muhammad Ali was a huge favorite, 15-1 in this fight. On top of that, too, it's clear that this isn't the same Muhammad Ali that we're looking at, right? He didn't put in like this stellar performance. But I agree with Nopal. When I was watching this fight, although I do think that Jimmy Young was winning some rounds for sure. Like to me, like he wasn't really trying his best to like take it from the champ. You don't go and face like who people consider to be the greatest of all time and put in a performance like that and expect to get a win at the time. You could call it cash cow privilege. You can call it whatever you want, but you're not going to walk away with the decision against Muhammad Ali with a performance like that, in my opinion. Sean, with the exception of one round, I saw this fight exactly like you did. I had Young winning rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 14, and 15. So 7-5. And then also if you count that standing 8 count, so I would have had it 114, 113, and then it was commonplace to actually give even rounds. So 3 even rounds, in my opinion. I thought that round 5 was a swing round, round 10 was a swing round, as well as round 11. And they also scored in the 5-point must system. So that was kind of fun. I just did it as just a little bit of an experiment. For those who don't know, back in the day, the winner would get 5 points, right? And if it was a draw, they would both get 5 points. But then you could assign any amount of points for the person who lost. So you can go 4 all the way down to 1, depending on how you saw things. And just as a reference, I felt like Ali wasn't doing much at all in that first round. So I gave the round to Young, and then I gave Ali 2 points for that. Like if he was a little more active, I might have given him 3, but that was my frame of reference for the whole fight. I actually thought, it was kind of a fun way to do it. I could see where, if somebody banks more meaningful rounds, like that could be telling in a result, perhaps like Canelo versus Triple G1, where like in those middle rounds where Triple G was really like coming on strong and like, banking some of those rounds more effectively. Like I think that a 5-point must system scored like this really could have perhaps swayed things even more towards Triple G, depending on how you look at that particular fight. So I thought that was interesting. I kind of liked this scoring system. With that scoring system, I had Jimmy Young winning 54-50 with 3 swing rounds, but I didn't think that this was a robbery by any stretch of the imagination. I did think that Jimmy Young was doing good body work. He had a good 1-2 combo to the belly. He was hitting that belly all the time, but I didn't care much for the way he was getting outside of the ropes. I felt like they were both inactive, and Jimmy Young had the advantage of fighting an Ali who was just not as good as he used to be, at least for this fight. His timing was off. His activity was low, right? And it's like, you can go back and watch all kinds of examples knowing that this isn't the same Muhammad Ali. Is it because he was fading in general, or was it because of this busy schedule? I'm not sure, and we can look into that a little bit more, especially as we rescore that Ken Norton fight. But I'll tell you this, like this was not a robbery in my opinion. The scandal, like I said, it could be at the time because Jimmy Young was such an underdog. But if you're just looking at 2 people fighting, like I think this fight was just close in general. So that's how I had it, man. I had Jimmy Young slightly winning this fight, but I didn't feel good giving him that score. And, I don't think it was a robbery at all. So we can certify this one as not a robbery, man. So now that we've covered it, like let's talk about it a little bit. Like, do you guys have anything to add, considering what we've all said here?
No, I agree. I think knowing the state that Ali was in, I feel like Young could have taken more advantage. And you hear it in when Ken Norton joined the telecast, he was saying the same thing too. He's like, this isn't really. I mean, he was saying it for both guys. He was saying, this doesn't look like Ali. His timing is off. He looks a little bit slower. He's missing a lot. And he said the same thing for Young. He's like, this isn't the same Young that fought Foreman. He goes, and I would say, there was like we agreed there was really close rounds, and I think if Young maybe would have stepped up or actually stepped it up a little bit, who knows, he would have actually maybe got the win, or who knows what would have happened. But as far as the booze, again, it's the thing with Ali being who he was in the 70s. A lot of people called him if I'm wrong, correct me, but didn't they call him a draft dodger or whatever? Because I don't know if that was the same era. So as it was, that in that time, 70s, it was real political, everything you name it, there was racism. There's always that. But you had a lot of, and even if you go back to watch some of the older fights, you can see and hear the telecasters too, not really giving Muhammad Ali like any kind of, like any props or any big ups. Like it was always like something negative. And that was kind of this here too. But Ken Norton, what I did like, Ken Norton did keep it 100. He was just like, look, he goes, I really can't say who's winning at this time, but he was hoping for that fight later on down the road. And I actually found it right here that the 4 fights that Muhammad Ali had in the year. So after the Young, he fought 1 month later against Richard Dunn, which was a 4-round knockout, and then 4 months later, that's when he had the third fight with Ken Norton. So, in those 2 fights, he ended up winning. He ended up winning a month later against Richard Dunn, a knockout. So, was it the inactivity in the beginning going into this fight with Jimmy Young, where it didn't look too great, or he just didn't take this fight serious because Young didn't have a good knockout ratio. So, and we see it nowadays. You see sometimes a guy won't take a certain fight serious or a certain fighter serious, and it shows. I mean, we've had the scores back, in the past, right? The De La Hoya and Stern. Like De La Hoya looked like he didn't even really train. He looked a little soft. I know he went up in weight. He got the nod, but maybe that's the way I looked at it when I overall looked at this fight, that Muhammad Ali being 34, I don't think he really took this fight too serious. I feel like he thought maybe Young wouldn't be too much of a threat because he really didn't have a high knockout ratio.
No, definitely. I kind of mentioned it before, and good point that you mentioned, George, as far as the telecast. That was a big takeaway for me. I mentioned Howard Cosell. That brother's way more negative than I envisioned in my mind. Just kind of listening to him, like they say now, dry hating. I mean, he was just pretty much just saying how he was out of shape. The only time he seemed like he got hype is like the 9th round. And look at him, he's dancing. But then when Jimmy Young was kind of dancing with him, he got even more excited. I mean, if anything, like we now talk about as far as biasness, like Top Rank and Joe Tessitore and how he's obsessed with Lomachenko. Some of the things that we hear, Andre Ward say some things that are kind of questionable, but I never hear just straight up negativity towards the fighter. So I was kind of taken aback by some of that as far as, questioning his heart and his commitment and, talking about him being out of shape and giving Jimmy Young, to me, seeming a lot more credit. And then to the point where the thing that we seem to be in consensus about, the going out the ring thing, it almost seemed like until Ken Norton questioned it, that Howard Cosell liked it, oh, look at him, look at the showmanship, and like, what are you talking about? This is horrible. To me, that kind of, I know they had banter outside the ring, but I didn't know during the fight, like he's talking crap about Muhammad Ali. But I think that also too, if you think about the time and the reality that with all those people that are millions and millions and sometimes billions of people watching him fight, that not everybody wanted to see him win. So that might have also been that dynamic of why people were drawn to watch the fights, because Howard Cosell was not just painting a picture of him being just the greatest. He was just kind of calling it like it is. But to me, he seemed a lot more on the negative end than I would have ever imagined. Maybe it was just that fight I need to watch some more. So I look forward to the Ken Norton rescore. But he seemed to be overly critical and almost like he wanted. Maybe he had some of that 15-1 odd money on it, but almost like he wanted Jimmy Young to win. That was my takeaway. It's kind of a surprise that because they've always been kind of linked together, but I didn't know it was banter inside and outside the ring and during the telecast. So that was kind of my takeaway.
And Gringo, it's very interesting that you note that detail right there about you know, because that would be like having David Faitelson on there, you know, doing one of the Canelo fights, you know, and the whole way just talking crap about him. And to be honest, we don't know if this is something that the promoters and all that they they do this to capitalize on something. You know what I mean? Because you do have the side of the fan bases that don't like the guy, which it was back then, Muhammad Ali, because you said that, you know, what there was a lot of reasons why some people didn't like him. Part of it could be racist fans, you know, a lot of different reasons. But and then you have your loyal supporters, and the same could be said, you know, maybe they were just capitalizing on that and using it to get more views, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a great point, no, Paul. Like another that wouldn't happen today, just point blank. And another thing that to me, as far as like what he said, I wouldn't say like it crossed the line, but like it caught my attention. Like I'm watching, like man, they would never say nothing like that, because he like kept pointing it out. Like you know, Howard Cosell kept saying like, man, it just looks like he just doesn't get up for other fighters. You know, like he kept saying like he only gets up for the big fighters. Like, what are you talking about? Like he's won over 50 times. He gets up for all the fights. So he was just no, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like a great classic Muhammad Ali performance. If you want to see a great Muhammad Ali fight, this is not the one you want to watch, guys. But I will say like it wasn't that's not what he always if he's not fighting a top guy, you're not going to see a Jimmy Young type performance. And that's kind of how he portrayed it. You know, is this basically he comes in out of shape, which this is the second heaviest he was outside of his very last fight. You know, so you know, he was usually in shape and he actually lost I believe 18 pounds when he fought Ken Norton later on within the same calendar year. So yeah, I was, you know, man, I had no idea that Howard Cosell was just such a hater. But again, that's I guess what the people wanted to hear, because they empowered him to say that. And I think to a certain extent, I think Muhammad Ali liked it too. He had to, because like you just gave the example, no, Paul.
Yeah,
There's no
I think
way
so.
Canelo would sign off on that, man.
And I think I saw a video. I'm not sure, but I think I saw a video of one time Muhammad Ali talking to him, like an interview type thing, and he's like, "Oh, you got to fix your hair," and it was like a wig or something, and he
Right.
moves it, and you know, like if these guys didn't like each other, they would have gotten super pissed at that moment. But Muhammad Ali, it's like a frenemy type, or maybe they were just, you know, it was part of the business of boxing that you have to know that part of that is like they have to say something bad about you. And they were just capitalizing on it because I have noticed some of like Canelo's fights, uh, it's like some of the rounds are hella clear, but you still got a guy on there saying, no, that was clearly the other guy's round. And I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe he's just saying that for the fans that don't like Canelo. That's like music to their ear. And the same goes back then. The haters of Ali, that type of stuff is like music to their ear because they're not going to tune in to just everybody slobbing the guy off. You know what I mean? They're not going to tune into that kind of stuff if everybody's just riding them, you know? So, you know, that's just some insight for us to keep in mind when we watch fights, I guess.
No,
Well, you know, like I feel like Howard Cosell, like, yeah, I agree with you, Gringo. Like it wasn't entertaining to me. Like it kind of got old already, you know, and I've seen some of his commentary and listened to it like with other fights or interviews. Like to me, it wasn't very charming. And yeah, you know, I think you're right. Like Ali must have agreed to it on some level, right? And the example that I have for that is during Canelo's Callum Smith win at the very end, when Sergio Moro tries to make that point, like, and now this guy's a 4-division champion. And then Brian Kenny goes crazy talking about, like, well, he's not a 4-division. He didn't do anything at light heavyweight. And then Moro started arguing with, like, well, hey, he beat Kovalev. And then Kenny started saying, well, yeah, but he wasn't at the very top. And it's like the semantics, right? And what they were disagreeing about, while Canelo just beat the Ring Magazine champion, like, to me, it's just like, man, that's permanent and staying. And, you can't take that away. And since then, Brian Kenny hasn't announced a Canelo fight, right? So I thought the timing was very poor for those two to be arguing. You know what I mean? Especially when you're arguing a point that's just kind of your opinion on whether or not he's a 4-division champion. When he actually was, maybe he's not like the number 1 ranked light heavyweight champion, but no, he was 4 divisions. So like I think that Ali did have to agree to it on some level, but I didn't find it to be too charming or cute, in my opinion. On top of that, too, I think Cosell could have used somebody who could have maybe counterbalanced that, like kind of like the way Larry Merchant and George Foreman used to kind of go back and forth. Like he could have used somebody like that to kind of provide the counter argument to what the people might be seeing.
No, that's a great point. Actually, even though the audio was, kind of low on Ken Norton, I know he didn't come until like the end of the 11th and toward the 12th when, things started kind of like pick up as far as like the drama, so to speak. But having that, I mean, I'm big on balance anyway. Having Ken Norton there, because that was one of the most iconic moments within the fight when Ken Norton had to tell Harold Cosell not to question the heart of Muhammad Ali. When he was saying Muhammad Ali is just in there for the money, like, what the hell are you talking about? You know what I mean? So, but that was like very impactful to me, So that would have enhanced my experience, if that would have been the entire fight, But I get it. Ken Norton actually fought that night, so he was busy himself. But no, great point.
For sure, man. Does anybody have any final thoughts before we wrap this one up? Well, all I want to say, man, is it was an honor rescoring this fight. The great Muhammad Ali, and we're not done talking about him. We're going to be doing that Ken Norton one soon. Perhaps next, perhaps not. It depends on what we choose. Sean, you're up, man. This is our controversial fight options for this week. It keeps getting narrowed down, man. We're whittling away, bro. Take a look and tell me what you think.
Man, so I like punches and bunches. So I say we double back this bad boy, especially with a slow weekend coming up. We just have Wood Conlon. So I say Muhammad Ali versus Ken Norton, and just put Harold Cosell out of his misery. Respect him though.
All right, man. We're gonna do it.
Great.
Muhammad Ali back to back. I'm looking forward to it. Great recommendation. So we're going to be looking at Muhammad Ali versus Ken Norton 3. And I'll probably watch all 3 of them. I watched the first one, man, and it was very entertaining. Ken Norton won that fight, and he did win that fight from what I saw. So I'll be interested to see what the adjustments are and to see what an Ali looks like after this Jimmy Young fight, to see what kind of shape he's in and what Ken Norton can bring to that fight. Yeah. All right, man. Well, hey, thank you all so much for joining us, dude. Everybody have a great week.